Hello, and thank you for listening. I'm Sierra Greene, 35 years old, and 3 weeks ago I discovered my brother's wedding through a Facebook post, because apparently I wasn't worth an invitation. So, in rehearsal, dinner was destroyed. I stood up in front of 53 people and exposed the truth they'd been hiding for 4 years. That I, not my golden boy brother, had actually saved our family bakery from bankruptcy. But that bombshell was nothing compared to what my father revealed next. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. I found out about my brother's wedding the way you discover a leak in your roof. Not from the drip itself, but from the stain it leaves behind. 3 weeks before the ceremony, scrolling through Facebook at 2 a.m. in my Seattle apartment, there it was. Cousin Martha's post. Can't wait for Trevor's big day. The whole family will be there. The whole family. Apparently that didn't include me. 4 years. That's how long I'd been gone from Millbrook, Oregon. Population 3,247 if you count the cemetery. 4 years since I'd walked away from everything that suffocated me, built a life as a software engineer where my worth wasn't measured by how well I fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. 4 years of debugging other people's code instead of trying to fix my own family's broken system. 4 years of peace, but seeing that post felt like swallowing glass. I called Trevor that night, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number I still knew by heart. 3 rings. Sierra, it's like really late. His voice carried that familiar guilt, the one he'd perfected since childhood whenever he got caught stealing cookies or breaking Mom's favorite vase. The same tone he'd used when he was 12, and I caught him reading my diary. Listen, about the wedding. You weren't going to tell me. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear his girlfriend Jessica in the background, whispering something urgent about damage control and family drama. Mom said it would be complicated. You know how she gets. Complicated. That was our family's favorite word for anything involving me. Complicated when I chose computer science over home economics. Complicated when I got the scholarship to Oregon State instead of staying local. Complicated when I refused to pretend that small-town life was enough for someone who dreamed in algorithms and code. She said it might be better if I just disappeared completely. I interrupted. Mission accomplished, little brother. But here's the thing about being the black sheep. Sometimes you've got to show up to remind the flock you still exist. I booked a flight that morning, my credit card singing as I charged a last-minute ticket to Portland. Not because I was invited, not because I expected to be welcomed, but because Trevor was my little brother, the kid who used to beg me to read him bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. If he was making the biggest mistake of his life by marrying someone who probably couldn't spell his middle name, I wanted a front row seat to watch it happen. That's what sisters do, right? Show up when you're not wanted, leave when you're not ready. The plane touched down in Portland on a Thursday. Rain hammered the windows like bullets, and for a moment I wondered if this was Oregon's way of telling me to turn around. But I'd already paid for the rental car. I'd already taken the time off work from my position at Cloud Tech Solutions, where my colleagues knew me as the woman who could solve any problem except the ones in her own backyard. And somewhere deep in my chest, past all the logic and self-preservation, something stubborn was clawing its way to the surface. Call it curiosity, call it masochism, call it the last thread of family loyalty I hadn't managed to cut with my perfectly manicured programmer fingers. The drive from Portland to Millbrook took 90 minutes through countryside that looked like a greeting card someone had left out in the rain. Rolling hills dotted with farmhouses, forests thick enough to hide secrets, and gas stations that still had attendants who knew your name. As I passed the "Welcome to Millbrook, where family comes first" sign, I laughed out loud. Family comes first, unless you're the family member who dared to want more than what they offered. The house looked smaller than I remembered, like someone had pressed it in a book and left it there to dry. Same white picket fence Dad painted every spring with the dedication of a monk tending his garden. Same rose bushes Mom fussed over like they were made of gold and could single-handedly save her reputation with the neighborhood garden club. But the driveway held a car I didn't recognize, a silver Honda Civic with a future Mrs. Greene decal in the back window and fuzzy pink dice hanging from the rearview mirror. Jessica's touch, no doubt. Mom opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been watching through the curtains since my rental car turned onto Maple Street. Lillian Greene, 62 years old and still carrying herself like she was auditioning for the role of perfect mother in a community theater production that had been running for 3 decades. Her hair was set in the same style she'd worn since the 80s. Her makeup applied with the precision of someone who believed appearance was armor. "Sierra, you came." Not a question, not exactly surprise. More like resignation mixed with the particular exhaustion reserved for problems that refuse to stay solved. I did. I set my suitcase down on the porch, waiting for an invitation that felt like it would never come. The porch swing where I used to read Nancy Drew mysteries creaked in the wind, and I noticed it needed a fresh coat of paint. Some things change, some things just decay quietly until someone finally notices they're broken. "Well, come in, I suppose." She stepped aside with the enthusiasm of someone opening the door for a tax auditor. The house smelled different. Gone was the familiar blend of vanilla and coffee that used to greet me like an old friend. Now it reeked of wedding cake samples and Jessica's vanilla bean perfume, the expensive kind that came in bottles shaped like fairy tale castles. Speaking of Jessica, there she was, perched at our kitchen table like she owned it, surrounded by fabric swatches and invitation samples that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. 26 years old, blonde in that expensive way that required monthly touch-ups, and a colorist who charged by the hour, wearing an apron that read "Bride-to-be" in sparkly pink letters. Our kitchen table, the one where I'd done homework while Mom baked bread for the next day's bakery orders, where I'd eaten countless bowls of cereal while studying for my SATs, dreaming of colleges far enough away that I could reinvent myself completely, where I'd had my first real conversation with Dad about computer programming and why I thought it was the future. Now it was command central for someone else's happily ever after, covered in samples of things that would be photographed once and forgotten forever. "Sierra," Jessica jumped up with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for surprise parties and lottery winnings, all white teeth and perfectly applied lip gloss. "Oh my God, Trevor didn't tell me you were coming. This is so exciting." She hugged me before I could step back, enveloping me in a cloud of vanilla and hairspray, and I caught Mom's expression in my peripheral vision, tight-lipped disapproval disguised as tolerance, the same look she used to give Dad when he tracked mud through her clean kitchen. "We're just finalizing the last details. The wedding planner says we're cutting it close, but you know how it is with family businesses. Trevor's been so busy at the bakery, being the responsible one and all." The bakery, Greene's Family Bakery, established 1987 by my grandfather who believed in hard work and honest ingredients, nearly died 2016 when the economy and bad management almost killed it, resurrected by someone they'd apparently forgotten. But I bit my tongue. This wasn't the time, not yet. The kitchen felt smaller with Jessica's wedding planning command center taking up half the space, and I found myself missing the days when this room felt like the heart of something real instead of a staging area for someone else's performance. "Where should I put my things?" I asked Mom, nodding toward my suitcase that suddenly felt heavier than when I'd packed it. She glanced at Jessica, then back at me, and I could see the calculation in her eyes, the same look she used to get when deciding which bills to pay first during those lean months at the bakery. "Well, Jessica's been staying in your old room, helping with preparations. She's practically family already. Maybe the comfort in, it's just until after the wedding." The words were delivered with the practiced casualness of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation in her head multiple times. 24 hours. I'd been back in Millbrook for 24 hours, and I was already being pushed out like a piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. Some things never change, but I smiled. The kind of smile I'd perfected in boardrooms when men twice my age tried to explain my own code to me. The smile that said I understood the game even when I wasn't allowed to play by the same rules. Of course, wouldn't want to impose during such a special time. Romano's Italian restaurant hadn't changed since high school, and that wasn't necessarily a good thing. Same checkered tablecloths that had seen better decades. Same smell of garlic and disappointment that clung to everything like smoke. Same corner booth where I'd broken up with Danny Martinez before prom, because he wanted me to stay in Millbrook and work at his dad's hardware store forever. But tonight, it was dressed up for Trevor's rehearsal dinner, complete with fairy lights that looked like they'd been rescued from someone's garage sale, and centerpieces that screamed Pinterest wedding on a small-town budget. I arrived fashionably late, not because I was trying to make an entrance, but because I'd spent 20 minutes in the parking lot, practicing the face I'd wear for the next 3 hours. The face that said I was happy to be here, thrilled for my brother, completely unbothered by the fact that I'd been relegated to afterthought status in my own family's celebration. The hostess, a teenager who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on a Friday night, led me through the restaurant with the enthusiasm of someone being paid minimum wage to care. "Table 7, she announced, gesturing toward a table that might as well have been in a different zip code. The seating chart was a masterpiece of passive aggression, the kind of strategic placement that would make a chess grandmaster weep with envy. "Table 1, immediate family. Trevor looking uncomfortable in a tie he'd probably borrowed, Jessica glowing like she'd swallowed a Christmas light, Mom orchestrating conversations like a conductor leading a symphony, Dad nodding at appropriate intervals, but never quite meeting anyone's eye. Jessica's parents had driven up from Sacramento, looking like they'd stepped out of a real estate brochure for suburban success. "Table 2. The wedding party, college friends and high school buddies who'd managed to stay local and build the kind of lives that looked good in Christmas cards. "Table 3. Jessica's sorority sisters who'd all married their college sweethearts and now spent their time posting pictures of their perfectly organized pantries on Instagram. "Tables 4 through 6. Various relatives, family friends, people who mattered enough to sit within conversational distance of the happy couple. And then there was Table 7, me, the Hernandez twins who were catering the after party, and Jessica's 8-year-old nephew who kept asking loudly if he could go home and play video games. I watched the dinner unfold from my exile like an anthropologist studying a culture I'd once belonged to, but could no longer navigate. Mom, radiant in her role as mother of the groom, making sure every conversation centered around Trevor and his bright future taking over the family business. She moved through the room like a politician working a fundraiser, stopping at each table to share anecdotes about her son's dedication and natural business sense. Dad, quiet as always, cutting his chicken into precise squares and chewing each bite like he was solving a complex equation. And Trevor, my little brother who used to build blanket forts with me and practice magic tricks until midnight, who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly, holding court like he'd discovered fire. He was telling the story about the time he single-handedly saved the bakery's biggest catering order when the delivery truck broke down, conveniently forgetting that I was the one who'd called every rental company in 3 counties until I found a replacement vehicle. But memory is funny that way. It edits itself over time, removing the inconvenient details and highlighting the moments that fit the story we want to tell. The speeches started after the main course, between the second bottle of wine and the moment when everyone was full enough to be generous with their attention. Jessica's maid of honor, a blonde carbon copy named Brittany, talked about college adventures and sorority formals, and how Trevor was exactly what Jess needed to ground her free spirit. Trevor's best friend from high school cracked jokes about bachelor parties and ball and chains that were old when our parents were dating, the kind of humor that gets laughs because people expect to laugh, not because it's actually funny. Standard wedding fare, nothing that would stick beyond the drive home. But then Mom stood up, her wine glass catching the fairy lights like a prop in a one-woman show she'd been rehearsing for months. She waited until the room fell silent, understanding instinctively how to command attention the way some people understand how to breathe. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying that theatrical quality she reserved for special occasions and emergencies. "Tomorrow we celebrate not just a marriage, but the continuation of our family legacy." Mom's words filled the restaurant like incense, heavy and inescapable. Trevor isn't just gaining a wife, he's stepping into his role as the future of Greene's family bakery. Applause rippled through the room, the kind of polite applause that greets expected sentiments. She raised her glass higher, the wine inside catching the light like liquid gold. "I'm so proud of my son, the only child who truly made me proud." The words hit like a physical blow, but she wasn't done. She never was done when she had an audience and a point to make. To Trevor, for saving what matters most. The applause was louder this time, more enthusiastic. People love a good salvation story, especially when it comes with a happy ending and an open bar. Table 7 stayed silent. Even Jessica's 8-year-old nephew seemed to understand that something important was happening, something that required the kind of attention adults demanded, when they were saying things that would be remembered later. I don't remember deciding to stand. One moment I was cutting my chicken marsala into tiny, manageable pieces, the way I'd learned to do as a child when big emotions made food impossible to swallow. And the next, I was on my feet, my chair scraping against the floor with a sound that cut through the applause like a knife through skin. The room fell quiet, not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, but the suffocating quiet of a held breath, the silence that comes right before something breaks. The sound seemed to echo longer than physics would allow, bouncing off the walls and settling into the spaces between people's ribs. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every fork paused halfway to every mouth. Even the kitchen sounds from behind the swinging doors seemed to fade into respectful silence. 53 people turned to look at me, I counted later, during one of those sleepless nights when your brain insists on replaying every detail of your public humiliation. "Thank you for that," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. The words came out clean and precise, like code that had been debugged and tested for maximum efficiency. At least now I know exactly where I stand. I picked up my purse, the movement deliberate and final. The black leather clutch I'd bought for my last job interview, the one where they'd told me I was almost perfect, but not quite what they were looking for. Every eye in the room was on me, but I wasn't looking at them anymore. I was looking at the exit, calculating steps, planning my escape route like I was debugging a particularly complex algorithm. 3 steps toward the door. 3 steps toward the rental car and the hotel room and the flight back to Seattle, where people knew me as Sierra, the problem solver, not Sierra, the problem child. 3 steps toward a life where my contributions were measured in lines of code and quarterly reviews instead of family loyalty and small-town expectations. But then I heard it. "Sierra," Dad's voice stopped me like a hand on my shoulder. I turned back, and there he was, Nathan Greene, 65 years old and still built like the construction worker he'd been before he married into the bakery business. He'd spent his whole adult life working with his hands, building things that lasted, fixing things that were broken. He'd been quiet through dinner, quiet through the speeches, quiet through 37 years of marriage to a woman who treated volume like a weapon and silence like surrender. But now he was standing too, his weathered hands steady on the table, his carpenter's fingers spread flat against the checkered tablecloth. His face was the same one I remembered from childhood, lined from years of outdoor work, kind eyes that saw more than they let on, the kind of steady presence that made you believe everything would work out eventually. But there was something different now, something I'd never seen before. Determination, maybe, or just exhaustion with the way things had always been. "Tell them," he said, his voice carrying across the restaurant with the weight of decades of silence finally breaking. "Tell them what you did." The room shifted. Suddenly, table 7 didn't feel so far away. Suddenly, the kitchen doors seemed less like an escape route and more like a stage entrance. I looked at Mom, whose face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied foundation, the color draining away like water from a broken dam. I looked at Trevor, whose mouth had fallen open like he'd forgotten how to close it, his eyes wide with the kind of panic that comes when you realize your comfortable lies are about to be exposed to daylight. "What I did," I repeated, taking a step back toward the table. Each word felt like a small revolution, a tiny declaration of independence from the script I'd been handed at birth. What I did when the bakery was 3 months behind on rent and facing foreclosure. What I did when the health inspector was threatening to shut us down. What I did when Mom was crying herself to sleep every night because she thought she'd lost Grandpa's legacy. My voice was getting stronger with each word, each memory, each truth I'd swallowed for the sake of family peace. The words tasted like freedom and felt like fire in my throat. I filed the paperwork to incorporate us as an LLC. I restructured the SBA loan that was bleeding us dry at 18% interest. I redesigned the point-of-sale system and built the website that tripled our online orders. The words came out clean and sharp, surgical in their precision. I saved the bakery, not Trevor, me. The silence that followed was different now. Not the silence of discomfort, but the silence of truth settling into space where lies used to live. Trevor was the first to speak, and when he did, his voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger, higher-pitched, uncertain, the confident tone from his earlier stories completely gone. I don't remember it that way. He looked around the room as if the other guests might back him up, might confirm that his version of history was the real one, the one that made sense and kept the family mythology intact. His hand reached for Jessica's, seeking the kind of support that comes from someone who believes your version of yourself completely. You helped, sure, but helped. The word came out sharper than I intended, but some truths require sharp edges to cut through years of comfortable fiction. I pulled out my phone, fingers flying across the screen with the muscle memory of someone who lived their life through technology. State of Oregon Business Registration, filed March 15, 2016. LLC conversion approved April 2nd. Signed by Sierra M. Greene, registered agent. I held up the screen, the digital proof glowing in the restaurant's dim lighting. SBA loan modification, processed through Columbia River Bank. Primary applicant and guarantor, Sierra M. Greene. Another swipe, another document, another nail in the coffin of the story they'd been telling themselves. Website domain registration, payment history for Square processing, Google Analytics showing a 340% increase in online traffic between April and September 2016. The evidence was damning because it was boring. Numbers don't lie the way memory does. Documents don't reshape themselves to fit a more comfortable narrative, or edit out the inconvenient details that make heroes look human. Bank statements don't care about family dynamics or birth order or who mom thinks deserves credit. Trevor's face was cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion giving way to recognition, giving way to shame, giving way to a desperate kind of anger that comes when you realize your comfortable identity is built on someone else's foundation. Jessica squeezed his hand tighter, her perfectly manicured nails leaving little half-moon impressions in his palm. She was looking between us like she was watching a tennis match, trying to follow the trajectory of accusations and evidence flying back and forth across the net of family dysfunction. Her sorority sisters at table 3 were whispering among themselves, probably updating their group chat with real-time commentary on the drama unfolding before their perfectly mascaraed eyes. Even if that's true, Mom interjected, her voice sharp enough to cut glass and twice as brittle. It doesn't change anything fundamental about this family. She straightened in her chair, every inch the queen defending her chosen heir against a pretender to the throne. Her wine glass trembled slightly in her hand, the only sign that her perfect composure was starting to crack around the edges. Trevor is the one who stayed. Trevor is the one who's committed to carrying on the family tradition. Trevor is the one who understands what loyalty means. She gestured around the room like she was presenting evidence to a jury. Anyone can file paperwork, Sierra. It takes character to build a life. That's when I played my trump card, the one I'd been holding for 4 years like a loaded gun I'd hoped I'd never have to fire. The one I'd saved for exactly this moment when the comfortable lies became too expensive to maintain. Tell them about the website, Mom. Tell them about the Instagram account that has 12,000 followers and brings in 30% of our revenue. Tell them about the catering contracts with 3 Portland restaurants that pay us more in a month than the storefront used to make in a quarter. I turned to address the room, my voice carrying the confidence I'd learned in conference rooms full of men who thought they were smarter than me. The authority that comes from knowing your own worth even when everyone else pretends not to see it. Greene's Family Bakery didn't just survive because of paperwork. It survived because I spent every weekend for 2 years driving to farmers markets in Portland, Salem, and Eugene, building relationships one conversation at a time, creating a brand that people actually wanted to be part of instead of just tolerating out of small-town loyalty. The room was completely silent now, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they've been watching a performance, and suddenly the curtain has been pulled back to reveal the machinery backstage. I turned a small-town bakery that was hemorrhaging money into a destination business that food bloggers write about and wedding planners recommend to their clients. I looked directly at Trevor, my little brother who used to practice his magic tricks on me before performing them for Mom and Dad, who trusted me to keep his secrets before he learned to keep secrets from me. You want to know why wedding planners from Portland recommend us, little brother? It's not because of Grandpa's old recipes or Mom's customer service skills. It's not because of the charming small-town atmosphere or the nostalgic appeal of a family business. My voice was steady now, surgical in its precision. It's because of the reputation I built, one 5-star review at a time, one satisfied customer at a time, one successful event at a time. It's because I understood that survival wasn't enough. We had to be worth choosing. The room erupted. Jessica's parents exchanged the kind of uncomfortable glances usually reserved for dinner parties, where someone brings up politics or reveals too much about their marriage. The wedding party looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, suddenly fascinated by their phones and the contents of their wine glasses. Mom's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in real time, and she looked like I'd just set fire to everything she'd spent years building. But for the first time in 4 years, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was out, messy and uncomfortable and absolutely necessary, and there was no taking it back. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, heavy and thick like smoke from a fire that everyone could smell but no one wanted to acknowledge. Trevor was staring at his hands, those same hands that used to help me frost cookies when we were kids, when we still believed that working together meant something more than just sharing the same last name. His wedding ring, a simple gold band Jessica had picked out, caught the light as his fingers trembled slightly against the tablecloth. "She's right." The words came out so quietly I almost didn't hear them, but in that silent room, they might as well have been shouted through a megaphone. Trevor looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since I'd stood up, and I saw something there I hadn't seen in years. Honesty. Raw, uncomfortable, devastating honesty. Sierra's right about everything. His voice got stronger with each word, like he was finding courage he didn't know he had. I knew she filed the paperwork. I knew she restructured the loan. I knew she built the website and drove to those farmers markets every weekend until her car practically knew the route by itself. Jessica's grip on his hand tightened, her knuckles going white against her engagement ring. The diamond caught the restaurant's dim lighting like a tiny star that had fallen to earth and gotten trapped in metal and promises. "Trevor, honey, what are you saying?" Her voice carried that careful sweetness that women use when they're trying to guide their men back to the script everyone agreed on. But Trevor wasn't following scripts anymore. "I'm saying I knew my sister saved our family's business, and when people started calling me the hero, I didn't correct them." He pulled his hand free from Jessica's grip, the movement deliberate and final. "I'm saying I let Mom rewrite history, because it was easier than admitting that the family screw-up was actually the family's savior." His eyes found Dad across the room, seeking something. Forgiveness, understanding, maybe just acknowledgement that some truths are harder to tell than others. "I'm saying I've been living a lie for 4 years, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't taste like poison every time I swallow it." Mom's face had gone from pale to ashen, the color of old newspaper left out in the rain. "Trevor, you don't know what you're saying. The stress of the wedding, all the preparations." But he was shaking his head before she could finish, the same stubborn gesture he'd used as a child when he refused to eat his vegetables or go to bed early. Some things never change, even when everything else falls apart around them. "I know exactly what I'm saying, Mom. And there's something else Sierra doesn't know." He turned back to me, and I could see the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who trusted me to chase away the monsters under his bed before he learned that sometimes the monsters live in the same house as you. "Mom didn't just want to keep you from getting credit for saving the bakery. She wanted to make sure you never got any piece of it. She made me promise, made me swear on Grandpa's grave, that I would never let you back into the business. Said it would complicate things, muddy the waters, make it harder to pass everything down clean when the time came." The restaurant felt like it was shrinking around us, the walls pressing closer with each revelation. "She said you'd abandoned us once, and if we let you back in, you'd just leave again when something better came along. Said the bakery needed someone stable, someone committed, someone who understood that family meant sacrifice." His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized my little brother had been carrying this weight for years. This knowledge that our mother had turned love into a weapon and wielded it against both of us. "But the thing is, Sierra, you never abandoned us. You saved us, and then we abandoned you." The words hung in the air like incense, heavy and unavoidable. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if it can be fixed. But I know I can't pretend anymore that I deserve credit for something I didn't do, or that you deserve to be erased from your own story. Jessica was the first to break the silence that followed Trevor's confession, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife through wedding cake. This is insane. Trevor, you're talking about ancient history. We need to focus on our future, on the wedding, on the business we're about to inherit. She gestured around the room like she was presenting evidence to a jury. Your sister left. She chose her life in Seattle over her family. Why should she get to come back now and claim credit for things that happened years ago? But Trevor wasn't looking at his fiancée anymore. He was looking at Dad, and something was passing between them. The kind of silent communication that happens between men who've spent years not saying the things that matter most. Dad nodded, just once, and Trevor took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs. Because there's more. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the kind of official document that comes with embossed seals and the weight of legal consequence. Mom didn't just want to keep Sierra out of the business. She wanted to end the business entirely. His hands shook as he unfolded the paper, and I could see Jessica's face change as she began to understand that this wasn't just about hurt feelings or family drama. This was about money. This was about the future she thought she'd married into. 3 months ago, Mom signed a letter of intent to sell Greene's family bakery to Heritage Foods Corporation. They're a chain that specializes in buying authentic local businesses and turning them into franchises. Trevor's voice was getting stronger now, like confessing one secret had opened the floodgates for all the others. They offered her $1.2 million for the building, the recipes, the customer list, and the right to use our family name. She was planning to announce it after the wedding, make it seem like a celebration, cashing out so she could retire and we could start fresh somewhere else. The room erupted again, but this time it was Jessica making the noise. What? Trevor, you never told me about any sale. We've been planning our whole life around taking over the bakery. Her carefully applied makeup was starting to smudge around her eyes, and her voice climbed higher with each word. I quit my job in Sacramento. I've been learning recipes and studying business plans and telling everyone about our charming little family business. Mom finally found her voice, and when she spoke, it carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades making decisions for other people. The sale is a strategic move. Heritage Foods will honor our legacy while giving us the financial security we need for retirement. Trevor and Jessica can start their own business, something modern, something that fits their generation. She looked around the room like she was waiting for applause. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to secure the future. But you weren't going to tell anyone until after it was done. Dad's voice cut through Mom's justification like a blade. He was still standing, still steady, but there was something different in his posture now. The set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, like a man who'd finally decided to stop bending. You were going to let Trevor plan his whole life around inheriting something you'd already sold. You were going to let Jessica quit her job and move here for a future that didn't exist. And you were going to let Sierra keep believing she'd been written out of the family business when the truth is, you'd already written the whole family out of it. His words landed like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. You were going to take the money Sierra's work made possible and disappear, leaving everyone else to figure out what was left. Trevor looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Mom, is that true? Were you really going to let me find out about the sale after the wedding? The boy who'd trusted her with his secrets, who'd kept her secrets even when they poisoned him, was finally seeing the woman who'd raised him without the filter of filial love. Were you going to let me build my whole future on a lie? Mom's composure finally cracked completely. I was protecting this family. Sierra left us once. She'll leave again. She's never understood what it means to be committed to something bigger than herself. She turned to face me, her eyes blazing with years of resentment finally given permission to burn. You think you saved the bakery? You just postponed its death. Businesses like ours don't survive in the modern world. I was trying to get something valuable out of it before it became worthless. But it's not worthless. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling to the financial app I'd been monitoring for years. Last year's gross revenue, $340,000. Net profit after expenses, $87,000. This year we're projected to break $400,000 in gross revenue. The numbers glowed on my screen like evidence in a courtroom. The Instagram account has brought in 15 new catering contracts this year alone. The website processes an average of $2,000 in online orders every week. The bakery isn't dying, Mom. It's thriving. and you wanted to sell it for a fraction of what it's actually worth. Dad moved across the room with the deliberate steps of a man who'd spent his whole life building things, and finally decided it was time to build something that mattered. He reached into his jacket, the same worn brown leather jacket he'd worn to every important family event for the past decade, and pulled out an envelope that looked like it had been handled many times, creased and recreased by hands that knew how to work with difficult materials. "Lillian, you're right about one thing. It's time to think about the future." His voice carried the authority of a man who'd spent 40 years listening before he spoke, weighing his words like a carpenter measures twice before cutting once. "But you're wrong about everything else." He walked to our table, his work boots silent on the restaurant's worn carpet, and set the envelope down in front of me like he was laying the cornerstone of something permanent. "Nathan, what are you doing?" Mom's voice had lost all its theatrical quality, replaced by something raw and uncertain. For the first time since I'd walked back into this family drama, she looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid of embarrassment or social awkwardness, but afraid of losing control of a story she'd been directing for decades. "I'm doing what I should have done 4 years ago when you made Sierra feel like saving our family business was somehow a betrayal instead of a gift." Dad's hands were steady as he opened the envelope, and I could see papers inside. Official-looking documents with the kind of legal formatting that meant someone had paid lawyers to make sure every word counted. "I'm doing what I should have done when you convinced Trevor to take credit for his sister's work. I'm doing what I should have done every single time you made our daughter feel like her love wasn't enough. Her efforts weren't appreciated. Her place in this family wasn't secure." The papers he pulled out were transfer documents, the kind that change ownership and rewrite futures with nothing more than signatures and notarized seals. 50% of Greene's family bakery, transferred to Sierra Marie Greene, effective immediately. His voice got stronger with each word, like he was finding muscles he'd forgotten he had. The building, the equipment, the recipes, the customer base, the online presence, the contracts, the reputation. Half of everything, because that's less than you deserve, but more than your mother was willing to give. Mom shot to her feet so fast her chair tipped backward, the crash echoing through the restaurant like a gunshot. "You can't do that. I'm your wife. I built that business alongside your father. You don't have the right to give away what we built together." Her carefully constructed public persona was completely gone now, replaced by something desperate and raw. "I won't let you destroy our legacy for someone who abandoned us. You already tried to destroy our legacy when you decided to sell it to a corporation without telling anyone." Dad's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath the surface. "And you lost the right to make decisions about the bakery when you forged my signature on the Heritage Foods letter of intent." The room went completely silent. Even Jessica's nephew stopped fidgeting with his napkin and stared at the adults who were suddenly acting less mature than he was. "That's right, Lillian. I found the papers in your desk drawer, my signature, except I never signed anything." Dad turned to address the room, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd spent years keeping secrets, and finally decided the truth was more important than peace. "My wife was planning to sell our family business without my knowledge or consent, using forged documents to make it legal. She was going to let our son plan his whole life around inheriting something she'd already given away." Trevor looked like he was watching his childhood memories being rewritten in real time. "Dad, are you saying Mom was going to steal the bakery from all of us?" The words came out like he couldn't quite believe he was saying them, like he was testing how they sounded in the air before deciding whether to believe them. "I'm saying your mother lost sight of what family means somewhere along the way." Dad's eyes found mine across the table, and I saw something there I'd been waiting my whole life to see: pride. Not the conditional pride that came with meeting expectations or following scripts, but the deep, unconditional pride that said, "I see you, I value you. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it out loud. Your sister didn't abandon us, son. We abandoned her, but it's not too late to make it right." He pushed the papers across the table until they were directly in front of me. "Sierra, this doesn't fix the past 4 years. It doesn't undo the hurt we caused or make up for the credit you should have received. But it gives you what you earned. It gives you a seat at the table you built. It gives you the power to decide what happens next, instead of leaving that decision to people who've already proven they don't understand your worth." The wedding was postponed, not canceled. Jessica was very specific about that distinction when she made the announcement to her sorority sisters, and posted the carefully worded message on Instagram. Due to unexpected family circumstances, Trevor and I have decided to delay our celebration until we can honor this important milestone with the joy and unity it deserves. Translation: the groom's family imploded 3 days before the ceremony, and nobody knew how to proceed. Mom moved in with her sister in Portland the next morning, loading her Buick with suitcases and houseplants and 37 years of accumulated grievances. She left behind the coffee maker Dad had bought her for their anniversary, the photo albums I'd organized for her birthday 3 years ago, and a refrigerator full of wedding cake samples that would go stale, while the rest of us figured out how to be a family again. Before she left, she stood in the kitchen that had been her domain for decades, and looked around like she was memorizing evidence for a trial. "You'll regret this," she said to Dad, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who'd already written the ending to this story. "She'll leave again. She always leaves. And when she does, you'll realize that loyalty matters more than talent, that showing up matters more than being right." She picked up her purse, the same black leather purse she'd carried to church every Sunday since I was in high school. "But by then it will be too late to fix what you've broken." Dad didn't answer. He just stood there in his work clothes, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, watching the woman he'd married drive away from the life they'd built together. After her taillights disappeared around the corner, he turned to me with eyes that looked older than they had the night before. "She's not entirely wrong, you know, about you leaving." He set his coffee cup in the sink, with the careful precision of someone who was trying not to break anything else. "You did leave. You will leave again, probably. But that doesn't mean you don't belong here." I stayed. Not because I suddenly fell in love with small-town life or discovered a passion for baking that had been dormant for years. I stayed because leaving would have proved Mom right, and I was tired of letting other people's expectations dictate my choices. I stayed because Dad looked like he needed someone to believe in his late-life rebellion. I stayed because Trevor was texting me every morning with questions about inventory management and supplier contracts, and for the first time in our adult lives, he was asking for my help instead of trying to prove he didn't need it. The bakery became our neutral ground, the place where we could work side by side without talking about the wedding that didn't happen or the mother who chose anger over adaptation. Trevor showed up every morning at 6, the same time he'd been coming for years, but now he looked at the business differently, seeing the systems I'd built, the relationships I'd cultivated, the foundation that had been invisible to him when he thought success was just showing up and following recipes. Jessica came by once, 3 weeks after the postponement, wearing the kind of carefully casual outfit that cost more than most people's car payments. She stood in the doorway like she was afraid to cross the threshold, afraid that stepping inside might contaminate her with whatever disease had infected her perfect wedding plans. "I just wanted to see how you were doing," she said to Trevor, but her eyes were scanning the shop like she was taking inventory of everything she'd lost when the family business became complicated instead of convenient. "We're figuring it out," Trevor told her, and I noticed he said we instead of I. Small changes, but earthquakes start with small shifts in the foundation. Jessica nodded and smiled, the kind of smile people wear when they're being polite instead of honest. And then she left. The next week, Trevor heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back to Sacramento and was telling people the breakup was mutual, that they'd realized they wanted different things out of life, which was true in the way that most breakups are true. They wanted different things. They just hadn't figured that out until the things they thought they wanted exploded in their faces. 1 month after the rehearsal dinner that broke everything open, I stood outside Greene's family bakery at 7 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee that was still hot and watching the sign installer bolt our new identity into place. Greene's Family Bakery, founded 1987, reimagined 2025. Below that, in smaller but equally bold letters, Sierra Greene co-owner. Not hidden in fine print, not mentioned as an afterthought, not credited with helping or assisting or supporting. Co-owner, equal partner, stakeholder in the legacy I'd saved and the future I was building. The morning light hit the new sign just right, and for a moment it looked like something from a magazine. The kind of artfully rustic business front that food bloggers photograph for their articles about authentic American small business success stories. But it wasn't performance, it was just truth, finally displayed where everyone could see it. No more hidden contributions or anonymous efforts or behind-the-scenes heroics that nobody talked about at family dinners. Trevor arrived at his usual time, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who was still getting used to sharing space that had felt like his private kingdom for 4 years. "Morning, partner," he said, handing me the second cup, and the word partner sounded strange coming out of his mouth. Not uncomfortable strange, but new strange, like a language he was learning to speak fluently. We stood there together, drinking coffee and watching early commuters drive past our new sign on their way to jobs in Portland. Some of them slowed down, reading the changes, probably wondering what had happened to cause such a public rebranding. In a town like Millbrook, new signs were news. Changed ownership was gossip. Family businesses admitting to family complexity was practically entertainment. "Do you think we can make this work?" Trevor asked, and I could hear the little boy in his voice, the one who used to ask me if I thought his magic tricks were good enough to perform at the school talent show. He'd always needed reassurance, external validation that his efforts were worthwhile. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. "I think we're already making it work," I told him, which was true. The bakery was running more smoothly than it had in years. Orders were up. Customer satisfaction was high. The books balanced. The future looked stable. But that wasn't really what he was asking. He was asking if we could be siblings again, if we could work together without the weight of unspoken resentments and competing loyalties. He was asking if forgiveness was possible when the damage had been public and the healing had to happen in front of the same audience that witnessed the breakdown. "Mom called me yesterday," he said, which wasn't entirely surprising, but wasn't exactly welcome news either. She wanted to know if I'd changed my mind about the sale, said Heritage Foods is still interested, that the offer might even be better now that we've got more recent financial data to show them. He took a long sip of his coffee, buying time to figure out how to say what came next. I told her the bakery wasn't for sale, that it never was for sale, that she never had the right to sell something that belonged to all of us. A customer pulled into the parking lot, Mrs. Henderson from the post office, probably picking up her usual Tuesday morning Danish and coffee. She waved at us through her windshield, the kind of friendly small-town greeting that assumes everything is fine until proven otherwise. In 2 minutes, she'd be inside asking about the new sign and telling us how nice it looked, how professional, how good it was to see family businesses adapting to modern times. "She'll come back eventually," I said to Trevor, watching Mrs. Henderson gather her purse and prepare to become our first customer under the new management structure. "Mom, this is her home. Her life is here. She'll figure out a way to make peace with the new reality." I wasn't sure I believed that, but some possibilities are worth hoping for even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Trevor unlocked the front door and flipped the sign from closed to open, the same ritual he'd performed every morning for years. But today it felt different. Today we were opening more than just a bakery. We were opening a new chapter in a story that had been stuck on the same page for too long. "And if she doesn't come back?" he asked. "Then we keep going anyway," I said, following him inside. "We keep building something worth inheriting, something worth being proud of, something worth the effort it takes to make it last." The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the display cases that would soon be filled with pastries and possibilities. We keep proving that family businesses can evolve without losing what makes them family. Mrs. Henderson pushed through the door with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting all morning for her coffee fix. "Sierra, I heard you were back in town, and look at this beautiful new sign." She gestured toward the window like she was presenting evidence of our success to an invisible jury. "It's so wonderful to see young people taking over family businesses and making them their own. Your grandfather would be so proud." She was right. He would be proud. Not because we'd preserved his legacy unchanged, but because we'd honored it by making it stronger. Because we'd learned that tradition isn't about keeping everything exactly the same. It's about keeping the good parts and having the courage to change the rest. Because we'd figured out that family businesses work best when they're built on family that actually works. Trevor handed Mrs. Henderson her Danish and coffee, and she paid with exact change like she always did, counting out quarters and dimes with the precision of someone who'd been managing small-town economics for decades. After she left, we stood behind the counter in our reimagined family business, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the sound of the espresso machine, and the knowledge that we'd built something neither of us could have created alone. "So what now?" Trevor asked. And for once, I had an answer that felt true. Now we bake bread, we serve coffee, we take care of customers, we make decisions together. We split the profits and the responsibilities and the satisfaction of doing work that matters. I tied my apron around my waist, the same apron I'd worn years ago when saving the business was a secret I carried alone. We proved that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to refuse to be trapped by it. The day stretched ahead of us, full of orders to fill and customers to serve, and 1,000 small decisions that would shape what we were building together. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I booked that flight from Seattle. It wasn't the family reconciliation that happens in movies, complete with tears and apologies and everyone learning important lessons about love and forgiveness. But it was real, it was honest, it was ours, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Thank you for joining me on my journey of reclaiming my place in my own story. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to disappear, to stand up and say, "I was here, I mattered, I made a difference." If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their contributions matter, even when others try to erase them. Remember, you don't need permission to claim credit for your own work, and you don't need an invitation to take your rightful place at the table you built. Until next time, keep fighting for your seat and never let anyone edit you out of your own success story.